What's up, everybody? We are back with another season of professional picks and another NFL season with week one right around the corner. In this video, we're going to talk about as many of the games as possible in week one. And I'm not going to talk just about the slate, but also recap the most important activities that happened to each team in the offseason, talking free agency, trades, the draft, everything they did to bring their team to the point where they are right now. And for that, it's going to take two videos. We're going to start with the first half of the games in this video, starting with the first game of the NFL season as we get the defending Super Bowl champions, the Philadelphia Eagles, hosting their division rivals, the Dallas Cowboys. Now, it's hard to evaluate these teams without having played any games in the 2025 season yet. So we're going to have to look a little bit at last year to see where these teams stand. And I think when you're evaluating this game, it becomes really clear the strengths and weaknesses of the opposing teams and how it's going to play out this game. For example, the Eagles have done one thing, actually, they did many things great to win a Super Bowl last year, but on offense, that main thing was run the rock behind their incredibly strong offensive line and Saquon Barkley, who rushed for 2,000 yards last year. Now, this offensive line remains relatively stable with only one key loss being Mekhi Becton, who I think went to the Chargers. But other than that, that offensive line is going to be just as solid as it was the prior year, still handing the ball off to all-pro running back Saquon Barkley. That's going to be prevalent early and often this game, especially against the Dallas Cowboys unit, that defensive unit that ranked third to worst in the NFL last year in run defense. They didn't do a ton to address that defense in key signings. And even when they have a great guy in the field like Micah Parsons, who shows up in their pass rush, top five rush unit in the league last year for Dallas, they still struggle severely against the run. If I'm thinking about this game, I think the Eagles are going to run the ball early and often behind a fresh Saquon Barkley and use the same formula they did last year and use that running game to lead them to a pretty big success here in this game. You look at the other pieces on the Eagles offense, Jalen Hurts, who was a great quarterback, in at least within this offensive system. This team shines the best, the Eagles do, when Jalen Hurts is not the focal point of this offense nor the team. Sticking with the offensive side, he does have great weapons to throw to in A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, using that play action after the run is established so severely, and getting these guys open downfield is what makes this offense produce such big plays. I really think you're going to see minimal Jalen Hurts here in this game with a lot of Saquon Barkley hitting in those big connections when the defense starts to stack the box and decide they've had enough is enough with a run. Another mismatch here is just the incredibleness that is this Philadelphia Eagles defense. They were the number one PFF rated defense last year, the number two run defense, and the number one coverage unit, one of the best pass rushes in the NFL last year. It's really hard to find a weak spot within this defense. What is going to hurt them this year is a few key departures at different levels of that defense, but I still think they did a pretty good job mitigating that and have a lot of talent elsewhere on that defense. But those big departures, I mentioned their number one coverage grade. They lost two key cornerbacks, albeit aging cornerbacks, in Darius Slay, who's now at Pittsburgh, and with the release of other cornerback James Bradbury. On the defensive line, that really solid front seven with the second best pass rush and second best run defense. They lost Milton Williams, who went to New England. He's the highest player on that roster, and then Josh Sweat, another great defensive guy there on that front seven. They still have a depth of talent there, and while I do think the Eagles defense takes a step back with some of those losses, they still have a lot of great talent, a lot of great names across that defense to mitigate this Cowboys offense that wasn't great last year. Part of that was Dak Prescott's injury, but even when he was in, this Cowboys team is severely lacking a run game, which is antithetical to what we've seen from Cowboys teams in the past. Ranked 31st in the league in run last year behind, kind of a no-name backfield, and not much is going to change this year. New faces, same story, where you've got a weak running back by committee with Jaden Blue and journeyman, or not really journeyman, but running back Javonte Williams, who came over from Denver after not doing too well over there. This run game lacks an identity for the Cowboys, and again, very much unlike the Cowboys teams that we've seen in the past. And it's not like you can hang your hat on a great offensive line like you're used to for the Cowboys in seasons prior. They have, a below average 19th overall run block grade this last offseason, but in an even worse pass blocking grade, being bottom 10 in the league from this unit. So even if they did have great running backs, this offensive line is not producing like it had been in the past. Using their first round pick on an offensive guard, Tyler Booker, should help this Cowboys team, but I think this offensive line needs a little bit more patchwork than just a rookie first round pick to make this run game churn, especially with some of the names they have in that running backfield. On offense for the Cowboys, you got all pro wide receiver CeeDee Lamb, which is going to help. But what this team struggled with last year was having a reliable number two option. Enter George Pickens, who the Cowboys traded for from Pittsburgh Steelers. It should be a pretty good deep threat, taking the cap off this defense and allowing CeeDee Lamb to have a little bit more space in the short and medium term throws. But even still, I think this offense is lacking a little bit more firepower than needed to hang with the Eagles here. Because of all that, balancing all these strengths and weaknesses, really believing that the Eagles are going to dominate the run game early and often and stifle this Cowboys offense, especially in the run game, leaving them no choice but to pass on first, second, and third down. That's going to really play into the Eagles' game plan and their favor, having one of the better pass rushes in this league. I just think the Eagles roll in this game. No Super Bowl hangover here, and I really like the Eagles to blow out the Cowboys in the season opener here in the NFL. Before I move on to the next video, don't forget to like the video if you're enjoying it. Let me know in the comment section of what you're thinking about these games, and be sure to subscribe to get great content like this, especially part two of this video in the near future. Moving on to the other team that played in the Super Bowl and lost, the Kansas City Chiefs, after a 15-win season, go on the road to another divisional opponent game here and play the Chargers. I mentioned these guys were in the same division. They play each other twice every year. They're very familiar with each other. And while the Chiefs are one of the better football teams and won 15 games last year, the Chargers match up very well with them and hung with them in one-score games in the times they played them the last two seasons. And the real reason the Chargers are able to hang with these guys is they're one of their better defensive unit, top 10 in the league last year, really hanging their hat on a great coverage unit led by all-pro safety and part-time chess piece Derwin James out there that really can move around in so many different positions and make this defense so amorphous that the QBs just get so confused with the coverage that they're looking at. Other than that, the secondary is downright great in LA for the Chargers. Where they struggle with defensively is their front seven, especially after the key loss of longtime defensive end and former top three pick Joey Bosa, who has since departed to Buffalo. Now you still have Khalil Mack at defensive end, who had a great season last year and one of his most efficient seasons, quite frankly. But he's 34 now and can't lead this defensive front seven on his own. And I think this Chargers defense that didn't have the best pass rush, just below average last year, is going to take a step back. Again, that still matches up well with the Chiefs because the Chiefs aren't known for their great run game. Last year Isaiah Pacheco got hurt, and so they had to rely on aging journeyman, this time Kareem Hunt, who was serviceable, but certainly lacked the big play explosivity that you're used to seeing from this Chiefs offense. Something else you weren't used to seeing from this Chiefs offense is a little bit of subpar offensive line play. And you really saw that rear its head in the Super Bowl, where Patrick Mahomes had almost no time to throw and get the ball off against that stifling Eagles defense. They do have some key guys that they've been around for a while in that offensive line, being Creed Humphreys, who's arguably the best center in football, and then Trey Smith at tackle there. But outside of that, you're missing a lot of depth there for the Chiefs offensive line. They didn't do a ton in the offseason to address that offensive line, and I think the combination, much like the Cowboys, of lack of addressing weaknesses on that offensive line and not having a solidified bell cow in that backfield are going to hamper this run game. And that leaves the Chiefs to rely on their different weapons they have on offense, and they actually, coming in the start of the season, have many and plenty, but there are some big question marks around each and every one of those guys. You got Travis Kelce, all pro tight end, who's getting older and a step slower. You still see him being effective in terms of getting the number of receptions you're used to, but that big play explosivity, and home run potential has diminished certainly. You're looking at other guys at wide receiver here. You got Rashee Rice. The big looming question over him is how long his suspension is going to be. He'll play with the first few games of the season. The NFL is going to come down on him with some suspension. But when he was healthy last year, he was a top 10 receiver in the league and a huge threat and playmaker on the Chiefs offense. In this game, he'll be playing, and he certainly will rear his head early and often. You get James Ward, the second-year speedster there that really kind of replaces the Tyreek Hill role in this offense. Can do it all in terms of running, uh, catching in space, and really making space for himself, or hitting the deep bomb. And then again, I said Isaiah Pacheco at running back. I think he's at least being asked and expected to take a big step up in this offense. We'll see what he can do as well. All in all, I think that Chiefs offense is going to be able to, put up points all season long, but they struggled to do so last season against the Chargers, failing to break the 20-point mark in each of the two appearances they had against the Chargers last year. The Chargers are going to want to win this game. It's going to be predicated on Justin Herbert's ability to put up more points than he did against the Chiefs and really playoff caliber opponents in general. I think that's the big gripe against Herbert here. Everyone knows just based on the tape that he can make any throw in the book, but where he struggled, it's been with consistency against playoff caliber teams, i.e., the Chiefs, i.e., Houston in the playoffs, and numerous other times throughout his career. The Chargers aren't doing a great job of giving a terrific supporting cast in the receiving core. They got second year guys, more slot receiver, Lad McConkey, who really came alive in the second half of last season, especially in terms of being a PPR yards after the catch guy. But after that, this wide receiving core is really, really thin. They brought back Keenan Allen after a one season rental for the Bears, but he's getting real old and certainly lacking a step at 33 years old. You cannot expect him to be the same Keenan Allen that used to be wearing a Chargers uniform seasons ago. They've got Tyler Conklin, who they brought in at tight end, who's a decent average receiving tight end, certainly a step up from what they had. But these aren't really flashy names that you would expect to build around the franchise quarterback that they're paying Justin Herbert to be. The one bright spot on this offense is Joe Alt at offensive line. What I think a lot of people are excited about with the Chargers using their first round pick on Omari and Hampton at running back. Not often you see a running back drafted in the first round, so I think that just gives virtue to the talent that the Chargers have, that the Chargers are getting, and how high they are in a player like this. But again, outside of Joe Alt left tackle, they brought in Mekhi Becton at offensive line to help that unit, which was uncharacteristically under a Jim Harbaugh offense, the 21st ranked run blocking team in the league. They're certainly bringing in Becton to improve that, as a Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh led offense is always going to be predicated on the run first. And so that's why I think a lot of people, myself included, are excited to see what this Hampton guy can do. Now, I will say what they have done in terms of offensive line is give Justin Herbert time to get the ball to his lackluster receiving core. With this unit being the eighth best blocking offensive line unit in football, I expect that to take a step up again. And when you give Justin Herbert time, he can throw the ball to just about anyone that's willing to make the catch. All in all, I think these two teams do match up really well with each other, and that's why it's really hard for me to pick the Chiefs minus 3.5 on the road against a divisional opponent. But that's exactly what I'm going to do because they have so much more explosivity on offense. Really, I think what I'm going to love to see is Rashee Rice at full health here after a pretty gruesome leg injury last year. And then whatever Andy Reid has in store for Xavier Worthy, I'm sure you're going to see a sort of gimmick play that gets him the ball in space partnered with the lack of playmaking ability I think the Chargers receiving core has. I struggle to see the Chargers putting in many points against the defense of the Chiefs, which is as good as it is with Steve Spagnuolo bringing back guys like cornerback Trent McDuffie and Chris Jones on defensive line. Not much has changed from this Chiefs unit that was the second best in the league last year outside of the Eagles. I think that trend sticks, and the Chiefs stifle this Chargers offense and put up just enough points and make just enough big plays to cover this 3.5 point spread. Moving on to another divisional game here, locked and loaded early. You get the Cincinnati Bengals taking on the divisional rival Cleveland Browns in Cleveland this game. Again, not much to work on when the 2025 season so far. But looking at what these teams did last year, it's not hard and difficult to see that the big thing plaguing this Bengals roster is their offensive line play. They didn't make any major additions to this offensive line, and I really question that decision from the front office in Cincinnati and leaves me a little bit confused on where their priorities are at. This is a offensive line that ranked bottom five in both run block and pass block. And if they want to allow their franchise quarterback, Joe Burrow, to get the ball to some of the best wide receivers in the league, being T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, he needs the time to make those throws. And that's something that this team has not given him in the past. It's the reason that Joe Burrow is frequently injured and not able to play a full 17 game slate, and the reason this team, frankly, continues to miss the playoffs despite MVP level quarterback Joe Burrow. On the defensive side of the football, the Bengals come in at kind of where they have been. It's not all on the offensive line. This defense has been playing even above average football here. They can't really have too big of a bright spot outside of Trey Hendrickson on this defense. But I think they used their first round pick to get a rookie D and Shamar Stewart that will help Trey Hendrickson, but still a lot of holes on this defense where it's almost a requirement for Joe Burrow in this offense to put up 30 points plus if they're going to want to win those games, something this offense is very much capable of doing. Speaking of offenses, this Cleveland Browns team is one of the worst equipped teams to put up 30 plus points, given their three wins last year and really poor offensive play all around, highlighted by an offensive line that's actually worse than the Bengals somehow. That usually doesn't happen in uncharacteristics for the Browns, but this offensive line play has been really sloppy for the Browns over the last few years. Last year, especially, coupled with the fact that they haven't had a clear number one running back since Nick Chubb's gruesome knee injury, too. I think people thought Jerome Ford was going to flourish behind this really good offensive line a couple years ago, but his play has not stepped up. And with this offensive line declining in caliber, you're seeing the run offense in the Cleveland start to become downright anemic. That's why they used their second round pick to bring in Quinshon Judkins from Ohio State. Still haven't signed him, so a little bit of a question if he's going to be playing this game. But either way, it's tough to run behind this offensive line. And it's going to be really tough for this offense if they can't run the ball to pass the ball because they're bringing in Joe Flacco, who has been serviceable throughout his career, but certainly not the ideal option at quarterback, albeit a step up from what they've had last year. You've got the departure of Amari Cooper at the trade deadline last year, leaving wide receiver Jerry Jeudy to actually perform pretty well last year in this offense on his own. Cedric Tillman at wide receiver started to step up before his injury, but again, just like the Chargers, these are two names that you're not necessarily thrilled about to be your number one and number two wide receiver, at least where we sit today. Offensive line play is going to hurt both these two teams, but at the end of the day, the Bengals have a much more powerful arsenal at their disposal. Not even mentoring Chase Brown at running back second year really lit it up in the second half of last year. I'd expect the Bengals to play out the same story you saw all of last season, where they can put up as many points as their offense needs to, but their defense really lacks. I just think they're getting a pretty nice break in week one, going up against a three-win team in the Browns without a lot of offensive talent. And outside of that draft pick to Judkins, didn't really do a lot to address this offense. Now, I shouldn't skip out this game without mentioning how great the Browns defense is. Being the eighth overall defense last year, the number one run defense, and the number three pass rush, really highlighted by former defensive player of the year, Myles Garrett. Using the number five overall pick on D tackle Mason Graham out of Michigan is going to be really big to that offensive line and make that pass rush and run defense even that more scary. But again, outside of that, not much going for this defense outside of their front seven. Bottom three coverage unit here really doesn't pose well for going up against the number one passing attack in the NFL with the Bengals. And then to add insult to injury, the Browns play more man coverage than any defense in this league, and Joe Burrow just happens to have the best grade against man coverage, which is virtuistic of his great ability, but also because of his wide receivers, T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, and their ability to create separation in one-on-one press man coverage. So I think if you're going to play out this game, you're going to see a lot of passing from the Bengals. Joe Burrow is going to be running for his life against this really great pass rush. But at the end of the day, the Bengals are going to get their points and the Browns aren't. -6 is a lot for this game, but I think I would certainly stay away from this game. The pass rush is going to be the great neutralizer for the Browns here against the poor offensive line. But I think you can arguably say the same for Trey Hendrickson against this Browns offensive line, especially against a much worse quarterback. I'd expect the Browns to have a really hard time putting up points this game with the people they put in place on offense. Certainly not enough to catch up to the Bengals, who I like to cover in this one. Talking about a little bit closer coin flip game here, you got the Dolphins who are actually come in as the underdog against the Colts here in our first non-divisional game of the slate. Both these teams won 8 games last year. Both those teams had a lot of questions at quarterback, albeit for different reasons. And we'll start with the away team, the Miami Dolphins, whose season always seems to be bifurcated between two tails, and it's pre and post injury to Tua Tagovailoa. When Tua is healthy, or the pre-injury phase, this offense is one of the most explosive units in the league, with really the foundation being built on speed, on wide receivers. Tyreek Hill, who just about everyone knows for his dashing speed, Jalen Waddle, who's also a speedster, and then a running back, Devon Achane, who can run everyone else out of the gym, outside of the two guys I just named. When Tua is healthy and able to get the ball to those guys in space, this offense is downright scary. And we'll see as these guys come in at full health how they do in this season. For the Colts, I guess how they do in the season before Tua gets injured. If history has been any scenario, this offensive line is going to continue to fail him, being the 21st best blocking unit and my bottom five run blocking unit. It's hard being Tua Tagovailoa out there with the way his offensive line has performed for him. Questions at quarterback for the Colts are a little bit different in nature, but almost a little bit more bleak over there as they're in a quarterback battle between Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones, which is a quarterback battle that most franchises do not want to be a part of. Anthony Richardson, after 2 seasons, is completing his passing percentage at just over 50% clip, which is far and away the worst in the NFL, the 2 years he's been there, and really just not able to get the job done. He's one of the most athletic physical specimen at quarterback, or really in all of football, but his inconsistency and lack of ability to make throws that you would expect from your QB1 to make leave Daniel Jones as the number one quarterback and starter in this game. Now, he's got a great problem to have in where he's got no lack of receiving depth on this team, albeit lacking maybe a true number one option. You can argue that Michael Pittman Jr. He is the number one guy there. I think he's one step away from a number one receiver, but they can make up for it in the aggregate with a great slot receiver in Josh Downs and great deep ball threats and Alec Pierce and Adonai Mitchell. Enter in rookie tight end Tyler Warren out of Penn State, and you have no shortage of weapons at your disposal if you're quarterback, no matter who's under center for this team. Throw into the fold a great running back in Jonathan Taylor and the fifth best run blocking unit in football for the Colts, one of their MOs season after season. And this offense, with a competent quarterback play, even sub-average like Daniel Jones is used to, can be a little bit scary. And I think that's why you see the Colts as favorites here. I think much to a lot of people's surprise. What is a little bit surprising too is this Dolphins defense, which is hit or miss in a lot of regards. They've got a great front seven, being the top seven, the seventh best run defense there, highlighted by Jalen Phillips. They made some good moves in this offseason to even help out um, that front seven, using their first round pick on a D tackle, bringing in Matthew Judon, pass rush specialist, to really fortify this front seven. But what I'm concerned about most when looking at this Dolphins team is their secondary, which already had issues last year being a bottom 10 unit. And then they had some more key departures than they did signings, especially in the secondary unit, with the key loss being Jalen Ramsey, all-pro cornerback, who is now playing football for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think you're going to see a tale of two defenses here for the Dolphins, where you can have a really tough time running the ball against these guys and doing much against their front seven. But as you start to open up the passing attack, you're going to see pretty cushy coverage and a lot of guys open downfield. All that is to say, I do think the Colts are going to win this game. I do think they're going to cover. Again, taking the favorite here. But I think a lot of people in their minds have the Dolphins the favorite in this game. I just think a really solid combination of, a good offensive line and Jonathan Taylor is basically about neutral for where this Dolphins run defense is. But the big separator for these guys is going to be their passing attack and pass blocking ability against one of the worst, what will be one of the worst coverage units in football this year. Without Jalen Ramsey to cover any holes, there's nowhere to hide for the secondary here in Miami. And I think the Colts are going to be able to pass the ball all day against these guys. Miami, while they do have a really scary passing attack, especially when healthy, are going up against an above average coverage unit for the Colts. And I think that's going to be just enough to slow these guys down. The Colts defense, one of the best run defense in the league, as they are each of the years they've had DeForest Buckner, who's just a force there. I think you're going to see this run unit dominate the game, force the Dolphins to pass the ball in a lot of situations, play into some of the Colts' strengths in their secondaries, and be just enough for the Colts offense to eke out enough points to beat the Dolphins here. I take the Colts to win, and when you're taking them to win, you might as well take them at -1.5. But this is going to be a really, really tight game. Not as fun of a game to watch this year, or at least on paper. You get two teams that found themselves in very similar situations last year. Both the Patriots and the Raiders lost 4 games last year, or sorry, only won 4 games last year. Both the Patriots and the Raiders brought in new head coaches to address their team's woes, and both those head coaches have had some nice success in the past. The Raiders brought in Pete Carroll, former Super Bowl champion and a long tenure coach for the Seahawks. The Patriots brought in former player, longtime Tennessee Titans head coach Mike Vrabel, who, if you watch this channel enough, you know that I hold near and dear in my heart. Looking at the Raiders here, they had the worst rushing grade offensively of all teams in football. That and not even much better. They had the second worst passing attack in the NFL. So this offseason, clearly they went to address both those issues. They brought in Geno Smith from Seattle. They used their first overall pick or their first round pick with number 8 to bring in Ashton Genty out of Boise State at running back. That should help the run game woes. That should help the passing game woes with an upgrade at quarterback there with Geno Smith. You get Jacoby Myers, who starts to flourish into a more of a number 1 role here with the departure of Devontae Adams, who's now playing football for the Rams. You bring in late in the offseason a veteran Amari Cooper, who was actually drafted by the Raiders probably close to 10 years ago at this point, who at one point was the number 1 in his career, but is certainly I'd say lacked production with the Bills last year. We'll see if he can come back into form this year. And then rookie superstar tight end Brock Bowers should help this offense in the passing game as well. Looking at the defense for the Raiders, not much of a better story there. When you look at the tail of the tape, the second worst ranked defense last year, really behind their truly worst coverage unit secondary in the league by far and away the a wide margin there. They didn't do a ton to address that, so you're still going to see a lot of woes from the secondary. Might not be the worst, but it's going to be pretty dang close this year, and it's still going to be an issue. Not a lot of shining stars in this defense outside of Max Crosby, who's already expressed his discontent from playing from this Raiders defense and asked for a trade because they really haven't done too much well. Even with how great of a rusher Max Crosby is, this team's still a bottom 5 pass rush unit. There are just so many holes that even an all-pro player like Crosby cannot fill all the gaps this defense has to offer. You look at the Patriots, they didn't have a great season offensively either, really highlighted by their league worst offensive line, which was bottom of the league in run blocking and not too far away in the pass blocking unit. Receivers didn't have a lot of help there in New England for even rookie Drake May to get the ball to. Not that he had much time to get the ball to them anyways. And their run defense, or sorry, their run offense, again, slightly below average and doesn't really help when you have the worst run blocking grade in football. The shining star for their defense was, not too much to write home about, but their coverage unit was about average, and that's about the best you can say about this defensive unit. But I did like a lot of the additions they made, both on the offensive and defensive side of the football this offseason, addressing a lot of the gaps that I just mentioned. The Patriots had the largest salary cap coming in this offseason, and they went to work early and often. On their defensive line, they brought in, I mentioned earlier, Milton Williams from the Super Bowl champs Eagles at D tackle. He's now the highest paid player on that roster, and rightfully so for his ability to stop the run at D tackle, but also be such an effective pass rusher as well, which is pretty rare from that position. Brought in Harold Landry at linebacker, played under Vrabel for the Titans for a long time, and that's a nice veteran signing. Robert Spillane from the Raiders at linebacker to help that front seven. Those 3 guys that I just mentioned all going to fortify that front seven, which was the weakness and is probably still the weakness of this team. You get veteran cornerback Carlton Davis to play alongside young, really talented cornerback Christian Gonzalez. That secondary is going to get a step up because of that. I think this Patriots defense is going to start reverting back to the form that we've seen in the past few years, becoming at the very least an average defense, if not above average, with some of these moves they made. Talked about the O-line, the run game here. They used their fourth overall pick to get Will Campbell, left tackle. Actually, might be right tackle out of LSU. They got center Garrett Bradbury, nice signing from Minnesota, and tackle Morgan Moses, who's been a journeyman and still an above average tackle in their career. So again, spending that free agent money to address the offensive line, using their second round pick to get Travion Henderson, great running back out of Ohio State, and using some money to sign veteran wide receiver Stephon Diggs coming off a knee injury after his season in Houston. So they were really, really active. Probably no one more active this offseason than the Patriots. And I think because you can't really quantify that until you start to see this team play under one unit, I think the Patriots are getting disrespected here with this -3 line here. I think the Patriots made all the right moves and did all the right things this offseason. I think I think Drake May, sorry if I mistook that earlier in the video. I think Drake May is an above average quarterback that when you actually give him time to throw and give him some weapons, that you're going to see this offense flourish. And he's got a great opportunity here against a really stymied secondary and one of the worst units in football. I like the Patriots here to cover. I like to see this team actually start to play some complete football on both sides, but especially offense. And I'm excited to see what these guys can do after adding to the offensive line, getting a nice rookie running back, bringing in a veteran wide receiver in Stephon Diggs, and letting second year quarterback um, Drake May really start to step up in his career. So I like the Patriots here a lot, actually, at -3 against a Raiders team that I just don't think has the pieces really all around. Like, I don't think Jacoby Myers is a true number one. Tough to make that justification that he is. Having some help with Cooper and Bowers is going to be scary. But again, I think that this Patriots offense takes a step up this year. I think it's going to have a really great opportunity to showcase that against the Raiders defense, and that's the difference in the world here for me at home with a head coach that I really respect in Mike Vrabel. So better defense, great move, offseason signings, and honestly, I think you can make the argument that the Patriots have the better offense now too with the moves they made in the offseason, and we will see what happens. But I'm putting my chips on the Patriots this game. This is going to be one of maybe not my favorite games to watch because I'm not too excited about this Tennessee offense, but one of my favorite games to see the score afterwards. Because just calling my shot here, I think that the Broncos blow out the Titans here, really in large part to their defense. And that's where I'll choose to start this analysis here. Denver had a great defensive season. I think everyone talks about in playing above average, if not stellar football, in just about every facet of that side in face of the game. The number fourth overall defense, according to PFF, highlighted by a great coverage unit led by Defensive Player of the Year Patrick Surtain, top five pass rush in the league, top 10 running defense. This is really a great overall unit that I think actually might be scarier this year than it was last year. They got linebacker Trey Greenlaw and all-pro safety Talanoa Hufanga from the 49ers. I think those are two of the most underrated, not talked about signings this offseason. Like I just mentioned how great their defense was last year, and they're adding two really, really like big studs on the defensive side of the football. I mentioned Pat Surtain. These guys used their first round pick on another cornerback, Jahdae Barron, just again to fortify this defensive front. They had no major losses on the defensive side of the football, and I think this is far and away the scariest defense going up against a Titans team that had the 31st overall offense, the worst passing attack in the league last year. I just don't know how the Titans are going to muster up anything with rookie quarterback and number one overall pick Cam Ward here in this game. You know, I think just the defense for the Broncos alone is such a justification to take these guys to murder the Titans. I liken this defense to where the Eagles were 2 years ago, where they made a ton of quiet offseason moves, got guys like Darius Slay, James Bradbury, Hassan Reddick, guys that everyone knows by now after their couple um, postseason runs and Super Bowl win. But at the time, no one was talking about it outside of me and a few other people. That's what this Broncos defensive unit is this year. And there's the tier of defense that the Broncos are in, and then there's everybody else. Maybe the Steelers, maybe, and then there's everyone else. This is going to be one of the scariest stifling defenses we've seen in a few years. Taking a page from, getting a few of those guys from the 49ers that made that defense so scary itself. When you look at offense for the Broncos, you don't need a ton against this Titans defense that, didn't rank all too well defensively last year, but a lot of questions with the receiving core, which is extremely thin. Cortland Sutton being their number one and reliable option, but really, I think lacking some consistency in terms of receptions. Great for the big play. You know he's going to get the chunk stuff. But when you need a guy on short and in medium or third and medium and third and short, they don't really have that as much of an option as you would for some other teams. Behind him, you might have Marvin Mims Jr., which isn't a great second option at wide receiver. They used their third round pick on Pat Bryant, wide receiver out of Illinois, which should help, and I would expect him to get a bigger role in this offense. But a big thing they did to help the passing attack is bring in Evan Ingram at tight end, and I think he's going to be the de facto number two wide receiver until maybe Pat Bryant gets some footing under him in this league. What really helps this offense is just the right now the best offensive line in football, especially the best pass blocking unit, giving Bo Nix, who was a rookie last year, all kinds of time, and that's why you saw so much success from him. I would expect nothing less as they're bringing back all five of their starters on that offensive line. Bo Nix gets another year under his belt, and again, I would argue more weapons now with bringing in Evan Ingram and Pat Bryant. On top of that, using their second round pick on RJ Harvey at running back behind this great offensive line unit, I think you'll see this offense actually take a step up from what it was last year. Really, with the key being in credit to the GM and management in Denver of bringing back that offensive line being such a focal point for this team. You look at Tennessee, there's not much I can really say that I haven't already said. Worst record in football last year, 3 wins, used their first overall pick on Cam Ward. On defense, I think the real bright spot is Jeff Simmons at D tackle, one of the best run stuffing and pass rushing D tackles in the game. Um, this I mentioned offensive line a lot for the Broncos. They got Titans have a very poor offensive line, not a great running back spread, not a ton of weapons at wide receiver outside of Calvin Ridley. They brought in an aging Tyler Lockett for the slot receiver position. I don't think that's going to help too much. Um, they brought in a couple guys in free agency, not huge signings, but solid signings to bring in and address that offensive line. But I don't really think they could have done anything short of a miracle to prepare their offense for what they're about to face on this Broncos team. I think the Broncos roll here. I like the under here. I don't think the Titans, if they could score more than 13 points, frankly, I'd be a little bit surprised. This Broncos defense is going to be really scary and going to be trouble for a lot of teams and going to make this AFC West divisional competition, or at least the wild card, incredibly scary as they start to really figure things out there. Another game that, I'm not too keen on watching, but there's going to be a few bright spots here with the Jaguars hosting the Panthers here. Tough seasons for both these teams, both these big cats, with the Panthers winning 5 games and the Jags winning 4 last year. Um, both of them going to have some really nice talent at wide receiver, both using their first round picks on the number one and number two receivers taken off the board. I'm going to butcher this name, but Ted Arroyo McMillan, probably pretty close. The number one receiver taken this year's draft, huge frame, 6'5", big target for Bryce Young as he starts to get um, taking nicer steps in his career development there. And I think the big reason why you saw such a stark contrast from Bryce Young's play last year was the progression development of the offensive line in Carolina being finally an average pass blocking unit and really an above average run blocking unit, which you saw Trooper Hubbard take advantage of as well. For the wide receiver stuff, on the Jaguar side, you bring in Heisman Trophy winner Travis Hunter, who probably going to play ball both ways here, and building on top of Brian Thomas Jr.'s incredible rookie season, putting on a top five fantasy performance in just his first year in the league. They bring in new head coach Liam Cohen here, who's an offensive guru, had a lot of success in the past in the Buccaneers, especially featuring the slot receiver role, which is exactly where Travis Hunter is going to play. Similar guys in the past that have played the slot position in Liam Cohen's offense have been Cooper Kupp for the Rams a few years back, and then Chris Godwin for the Buccaneers more recently. Going on about the Liam Cohen effect, he kind of revitalized and revived Baker Mayfield's career there in Tampa Bay after he was kind of lost at sea with the Browns and the Panthers. I think there's an opportunity to see the same thing here for Trevor Lawrence, who had a pretty solid 2023 season before injury and had a really poor 2024 season. Hoping that he can look back to some of the above average, close to elite form that you were seeing in 2 seasons prior with this talent at wide receiver now, using their past two first round picks on wide receivers, bringing in the running back duo of Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne. you start to see this offense have a little bit more potential than it has in the years past. Couple differences with the defenses here. The Panthers had the worst defense in the league last year, far and away. Maybe only rivaled by the Raiders, but still a few floors beneath them. Really struggled in the run defense, but worst unit in the league. Worst pass rush in the league didn't help their coverage unit, which came bottom three. So this defense is going to be an issue. They made a few moves to address that defense, but they didn't do nearly enough and sign enough big names to patch that up. There's a lot of patches for this Panthers team to fill, and you can't do them all in one offseason. Seems like they've been focusing more on the offense, as you can see, using some picks on wide receivers. Um, it's going to be tough when you have a defense as anemic as the Panthers have had. But the Jaguars haven't done much better on defense. 26th overall coverage and overall defensive grade here, so not too great. They're getting big help with Jordan Lewis at cornerback in the free agency, but still the secondary is a long ways away from being an above average unit. And I think it's going to have to be the offense for either of these two teams that differentiate themselves in this matchup. You got a lot more firepower and a trusted quarterback for the Jaguars here, with Trevor Lawrence being, I guess both of these guys are former number one overall picks. Neither of them have quite played like it yet, although you have seen flashes from Trevor Lawrence. Hard to deny that Brian Thomas Jr. is the most talented player in this game, and then Travis Hunter, who we haven't seen before in the NFL, might be close behind. I like the new look Liam Cohen offense, a healthy Trevor Lawrence to put some points up on the board here, take advantage of a really porous secondary for the Panthers. I like the Jaguars here to win this game by more than three, and honestly, I think by more than a touchdown with the way this offense might be clicking. The last game we're going to talk about here is a really fun one with the 49ers here, another divisional matchup playing the Seahawks in Seattle. I think most times these two teams have matched up in the prior seasons. You wouldn't see a spread this close, even when it is being played in enemy territory for the 49ers. But these two teams, the Niners especially, aren't the same rosters that we're used to seeing. The Niners last year only won 6 games after making a Super Bowl in the prior season. And what really faltered for them this year was the defense. Very uncharacteristic, stymied by injuries. You still saw a great coverage unit there, ranking top five in the league, but it was the front seven and the pass rush, the run defense that really hurt the 49ers. Bottom five in the league in run defense and not getting the same pass rush you're used to seeing, despite having so much talent in the front seven and especially on that defensive line with Nick Bosa. You didn't see a ton addressing the defense. In fact, I think you saw a few major pieces being lost. I mentioned Dre Greenlaw going and Hufanga going to the Broncos, which I think are incredible signings. But they also lost one of the better cornerbacks in this league, Charvarius Ward, who's been a staple there since they got him from Kansas City. Losing those three guys are going to hurt. They did a decent job addressing the defense in the past, but ultimately that's a net sum loss when you lose those big pieces. So this defense, at least the front seven, not getting better per se. Maybe they'll play better, but you're not used to and you're not going to see the defense that you expect to see out of the 49ers from the prior few seasons. On offense, they got riddled with injuries too, but ultimately, it all comes and goes with Christian McCaffrey, who's the real engine of that offense. He's coming back after, another season with some knee injuries. They're bringing in Brian Robinson Jr. from the Commanders to help out and especially be a handcuff if CMC were to go down with an injury. Um, so as long as CMC is healthy, I would expect to see this offense under um, Shanahan to keep on churning. You're not going to have Brandon Ayuk to start this season, but they are going to have former first round pick Ricky Pearsall there to help out. George Kittle, one of the most consistent tight ends in the league, and then Jawan Jennings, who had a late season, second half of the season breakout, which should help this offense as well. They had one of the better run blocking units, which is last year, which is why you saw any running back, regardless if it was Christian McCaffrey or the second or third stringer, have success. But ultimately, when CMC is healthy, this offense just gets kicked into another gear. Debo Samuel is now gone at wide receiver. I failed to mention that. So they're starting the season without their number one and number two receivers of last year in Debo and Brandon Ayuk, who won't be back frankly, until at least halfway through the season with the knee injury that he sustained. So this is really uncharted territory for some of the wide receiving core here for Brock Purdy. I think they're going to rely a lot of the run, a lot of George Kittle here as these other guys in the offense start to get, especially Ricky Purcell, start to find their fitting in this Kyle Shanahan offense in their new roles. For Seattle, surprising 10 wins last year under Geno Smith, who is now playing football for the Raiders. They're bringing in Sam Darnold, who had a lot of great success last year. I think a lot of people are asking, was that a Sam Darnold renaissance, or was that simply by virtue of having the great wide receiver talent that existed in Minnesota and having a great quarterback coach as head coach in Kevin O'Connell there in Minnesota? Um, We'll see what happens with that. DK Metcalf is no longer being thrown the football to in Seattle. He's gone to Pittsburgh. Aging Tyler Lockett was swapped out for an aging Cooper Kupp here in the slot. I think that's ultimately an upgrade, but Cooper Kupp being on the wrong side of 30, it's going to be a little interesting to see how he can perform in this point in his career. You saw Jackson Smith and Jigba really surge in the second half of that season, being a PPR monster and being the go-to guy and option in this offense. That won't change, but without a true Z wide receiver, think of a George Pickens or a DK Metcalf, and having a much more smaller, shiftier slot receivers like Tyler Lockett or Cooper Kupp or JSN is going to be interesting in this offense. You got a really great running back room for Seattle here with Zach Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker. What's really struggled with that run game here isn't the talent they have in the running back room, but rather on the offensive line, being a bottom 10 run blocking unit has not helped them whatsoever, and certainly not in the pass blocking unit either. Um, on the other side of the football for the Seahawks, they had a very inconsistent defense. A lot of playmaking ability and talent, especially in the secondary. Reek Woolen, Weatherspoon, Kobe Bryant there at safety. A lot of young, inconsistent talent where this defense can get together under defensive-minded head coach Mike McDonald, former Ravens D coordinator when they had a lot of success. This defense can be a pretty scary unit in football. They just need to figure out a little bit more of the consistency issues that they faced. That all being said, I kind of like this is the first time I'm taking an underdog here. I kind of like Seattle to win this game at home. It's all going to be predicated on Sam Darnold's play. I don't expect him to do as well as he did last year, but I do expect him to be an above average quarterback that we've seen over him the last couple of seasons. I think what really frustrates me with this, maybe not frustrates, leaves me questioning this San Francisco team is their defense that was not necessarily the strength and the foothold that we're used to seeing after a lot of key departures. I've got a lot of questions about this San Francisco defense. They've also got a lot of key departures on offense. I mentioned both the absence of Brandon Ayuk due to injury and Deebo Samuel leaving to go to the Commanders. There's a lot of new roles for most guys in this team outside of Brock Purdy, Christian McCaffrey, and George Kittle. Now, that might be enough to win this game, but I think it's going to be really tight. And I like the Seahawks with a great running unit, at least running back unit, with some explosive talent in Jackson Smith and Jigba, and maybe something under his sleeve in Cooper Kupp. And really just an invariable, inconsistent, but I'm hoping they play well defense to make this game go tip in their favor. I think this is going to be a really tight one, and I don't like the pick, but I'm taking the Seahawks here. I think a lot of people are going to be on the 49ers here just because they haven't realized the guards might have changed here in the NFC West division. I don't think the Seahawks are the powerhouse that they used to be. I don't think Brock Purdy is an above average quarterback, especially when he's playing from behind. When he's a little bit uncomfortable, you start to see his true colors show. And they were behind the eight ball a lot last season. I think winning 6 games, can't pin it all on the defense. The offense certainly didn't perform the way I think most people expected it to. And I attribute a lot of that to Brock Purdy's play when he's not in a comfortable lead. If the Seahawks give these guys trouble early, I'll be intrigued to see how Brock Purdy responds and this Kyle Shanahan offense. I'm sure this is one of the better prepared teams with Kyle Shanahan as a head coach and everything he's able to pull out of his bag of tricks for the offense. But again, I like Seattle here, given I think they have the quarterback advantage in this matchup. I think they have the defense advantage in this matchup, and by my book, those might be the two most important things in any given two matchups. So long as this offensive line for Seattle can hold up. Again, their pass blocking unit was weak last year, but despite what we think about the names on that 49er defense, their pass rushing unit wasn't there either. Again, taking the Seahawks for the win here to start the season off strong at home. That's all I got for you in this video. We'll be posting the rest of the slate real soon. But again, do not forget, please subscribe to the channel. Keep getting this content. Like the video. Let me know what you think in the comment section. I'll see you guys real soon for part two. And looking forward to seeing the rest of you guys as we round out the rest of week one.